Hmm.
Well, PJ, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you, sir?
I am well. Wait a second. What's different about you? Are you wearing
Uh,
glasses?
I am wearing
What's
glasses.
going
I
on
always wear
here?
glasses. I always wear
Are
glasses.
you? Okay, well, what's
This is my
different about you? You
inner.
you
This is my
wouldn't come
inner.
on there was a shock factor or some
There
surprise, but I'm
was.
not seeing
There
it
was.
yet.
Now my feelings are really hurt that you're not noticing that these glasses are. I normally don't have the whole full Harry Carey effect, but I
Got
am
it.
going for that internally and
That's what it was.
down deep to get that wonderful announcer's vibe.
I got you. Is that because we recently found out that I'm going to have to very casually mention it that we recently found out, in fact, a week ago Monday, that we are a top 3% global podcast. So now you need to be a little bit more, I don't
I
know,
got.
debonair. Is that what it is?
I gotta try to like create a brand. I gotta do something, right? I
I
can't be
got
just a
you.
schlub on the show. I gotta do something. So
I
here
got
are
you. Well,
class-
I have to do something too. I have to ask for a raise, PJ. I think given that we are now, in the stature, I think, and you're the one bringing the Braving Business podcast to the world. We're going to
uh,
have to do something about that.
yeah, let me talk to our advisors. We don't know if it's in the budget, so but we'll
Okay.
get back to you.
See how it goes, Alan. Well, we'll be introducing our guest, Alan Cohn. He knows a thing or two about ratings, though. Alan, you were a TV anchor and you were in TV for many years. Were you ever a top 3% global anything? No, I'm just joking. Can you tell us about your experience with ratings?
Well, I'll tell you what. The when I started a show on ABC locally in the Tampa area a couple of years ago, that it was a departure from what I always did, because I was always an investigative reporter and maybe a fill-in anchor. And in this new show, I was the anchor and managing editor. And we were starting from scratch because we were taking over the 7 o'clock hour, which used to be the purview of game shows. And uh, my boss thought that smart conversation about politics and what's happening in the news would do well in the ratings. And it had never been done before locally. I mean, how often do you see a 7 o'clock news on the local affiliate that's dedicated to roundtable discussions on local and national issues? And it was incredible to watch over the course of time how our ratings exploded. And at one point, I was the moderator of a congressional debate in the congressional district for Sarasota Manatee in Florida, and we had a 12 share, which is basically Super Bowl rating.
Wow.
And the station was, just amazed, and I mean, people from around the country were watching this, and so. On the other hand, I also was a reporter on an incredibly great TV news magazine in Miami, and we would do great, great, great journalism, but our ratings were so low they didn't register,
Mm.
and that was depressing. So I really kind of seen it from both sides.
Well, I'll tell you, here's my read on it. It's a lot of good fortune. I mean, we've had great guests and that's helped, but I didn't anticipate that we'd be doing as well as we are, as quickly as we are. And I feel
That's fantastic.
extremely
We're
grateful
just
about that.
we're touching the hearts and souls of so many people. That's what's driving it clearly, Tal. And to be able to have someone like Alan on the show just kind
Well,
of
that helps. Well, why don't we tell our audience who Alan is and take it from
absolutely.
there.
So our esteemed, awesome guest today is Mr. Alan Cohn, a Peabody and Emmy Award-winning journalist, as well as the 2020 Democratic nominee for U.S. Congress in Florida's 15th congressional district. Don't know where that is. Where is that, Alan?
It's basically the eastern side of Tampa.
Eastern. Okay. All right. Very cool. Alan was also the founder of AMC Strategic Communications and is currently the CEO of a very interesting nonprofit called Term Limit the Court, which is seeking to bring about term limits on Supreme Court justices. Tal and I, of course, are very excited to delve into this. We haven't really talked about nonprofits or talked to nonprofits on the show, but that's a fascinating world. Definitely looking forward to getting into that. Over a distinguished journalism career spanning over 30 years, Alan has worked for NBC News, CBS News in New York, and ABC News in Florida. For many years, Alan was the lead anchor and managing editor of ABC 7 News at 7 o'clock. He won his Peabody Award, which is, I believe, the highest honor for journalism investigative reporters, for uncovering that there were defective parts being installed on Black Hawk helicopters, endangering the lives of American service members. So thank you for that. He also earned an Emmy Award in Boston for discovering that a convicted killer was attempting to become a Boston police officer. Definitely want to hear about that. And also another Emmy Award in Miami for winning back benefits for a lost and forgotten Vietnam veteran. A journalist, a candidate for Congress, an entrepreneur, and now a crusader for reforming the Supreme Court. Wow. Alan, thank you. And it's a pleasure to have you on the Braving Business podcast.
Well, thank you both for having me. It's an honor.
Alan, it's great to have you here, and you've had an incredible, very interesting career. Obviously, investigative journalism has been where you've spent most of your career, and then at some point you made a decision with your family to run for public office, and more recently to run a nonprofit that has an interesting, and some would say very difficult, possibly some would say impossible path to becoming something that actually occurs. And so I'd love to hear about this journey. It does seem that the journey is often about doing good in the world, or attempting to undo bad. So tell us, your background, your story. How did you end up moving from, getting into investigative journalism to begin with, and then moving from there to running for public office, and eventually seeking to influence the public sphere?
Well, I've always kind of lived and worked in the matrix between journalism and politics, going back to my childhood. My dad was a pioneering engineer at CBS Television in New York, and my mom was on the Board of Elections, or she was a poll worker in suburban New York, and we always talked about politics. And I remember the summer I graduated high school, the networks used to hire a lot of kids of employees to go to the Democratic and Republican national conventions to be gophers, and my job was to watch the door of Walter Cronkite's anchor booth, and I was just blown away. I was blown away by what he did and who I was getting to meet. And so when I went off to college, that's what I studied. And around my school schedule, I got a permanent job at CBS News in New York, and I was mentored and taught by the great journalists there, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a reporter, and I eventually went out into the world. And first, I went into all news radio, and then television in Springfield, Massachusetts, at the ABC television station. And really, at first, I loved the opportunity to experience history firsthand, to cover presidential candidates, to cover races for governor and senator. And I got into investigative reporting, where I found that, this is just natural, that once you cover a fire, or you cover the president coming to town, you want to keep broadening your experience. And there was a circumstance in Springfield where a former police lieutenant was accusing the district attorney of being involved with the mafia, and everybody seemed to know it in that town. It was never really reported. I'm from New York. You do something like that in New York, it's news. And so I dug into it and uncovered a lot of evidence. And eventually the district attorney, who had been in office for 30 years, was chased out of office. And I found that my journalism could have a positive impact for the community in which I was living and working. And so it became my passion. I uncovered that a priest was accused of killing an altar boy. I uncovered a huge scandal in Connecticut, where there was a ring of workers at the Department of Motor Vehicles selling driver's licenses on the black market to undocumented aliens. And that was my way of contributing to the community. I found the work absolutely fascinating. I brought my experience down here to Florida, where I continue to do the same at ABC. But two things. Number one, I think it is natural no matter what your line of work is, if you are doing something for a living over a period of time, you continue to wish to grow and do different things. So my foray into the political world was really a natural exercise of that. And plus the fact that television journalism and journalism in general it's a really hard business at this point, and being willing to serve seemed like a great idea to do in a different way what I've done for many years in terms of trying to make the community a better place.
Wow. Wow. A few things. First of all, you and I have very similar beginnings. I also was in radio back in the early days. It wasn't all news. I was more on the music side, but also it's great to see that you've made this transition in front of camera, because my mom always told me I had a face for radio. So that's kind of why I stayed back there. But also I'm actually super thrilled that you're on today, because I think that as a society, there's a general statement, but as a society, I think that journalism and journalists in particular have gotten a bad rap over the past 30 years, 40 years, right? Like, I mean, we watch Die Hard every year, and the bad person in that show outside of Hans Gruber is the reporter, right? And so a lot of reporters, especially now with so much social media and everyone doing their own research on Google, there's a lot that journalism holds, and there's a lot of tenets that journalists are held to that I think aren't being appreciated as much, about all the measures that you have to go through to actually come forth with a story that is supposed to be valid and double checked or triple checked and all that. So I just want to say from a person in the populace to someone who's actually doing the news and actually reporting on real life events, it does matter, and it is appreciated. So I just want to make a comment about that, I guess.
Oh, I appreciate that.
It's just too much today. But with you in particular, your diverse experiences, you've been, I mean, just that little part you shared, fascinating. Involved in journalism, involved in politics, in business, now nonprofit. You've obviously encountered many different leaders, Walter Cronkite for one, of across the board of different genres. What did you learn about leadership, or what did you pull from these experiences, especially when it comes to how people build effective teams or coalitions that are going towards a common goal?
I've seen all sorts of leaders, news directors, management, in my experience, and I know that the best ones have been collaborative. I mean, I've worked for people who were great to work for, and Lord knows, the news director at my wedding, the news director I was working for was the best man at my wedding, because there was mutual respect. On the other hand, I've seen the flip side of that, where managers were so difficult to be around, screamed and yelled and condescended people that nobody wanted to be there. When I became not just the anchor, but the managing editor of my own broadcast, and I was, in charge of the editorial direction of the program, but I also was the boss. I had a staff of people working for me and helped run the newsroom. I tried to treat people the way that I want to be treated, and that is with respect. And that doesn't mean that there are not occasions where you have to come down on people and put your foot down. But I have always had this sense that I wanted to, or I tried to treat people the way that I was treated, and even when, in terms of journalism, going after them, I have never been the kind of reporter that relished the confrontational interview that you see, and that has almost become a parody of itself with a reporter chasing somebody down the street. But I've done my share of them. I never did them for effect. I did them because there was no other way to get the information. And I remember one occasion. I mentioned busting a ring of employees at the Connecticut Department of Motor Vehicles, and I had to confront the ringleader in the parking lot of the DMV, and I chased her all the way to her car, and the PR person at the DMV then called. I think my boss and the political reporter for the TV station said, why is Alan Cohn accosting my employees in the parking lot? And I remember the response. I was told the response was, well, you know what? He doesn't do that very often, but when he does, there's probably a pretty good reason. And and I appreciate that, because even in circumstances like that, I realize even if somebody has done something wrong, they have lives, they have families, and I put, I realized that when I would be asking the tough questions and going after information that I needed, and I think that is a long-winded answer to your question, but I think that's what leadership is about, and it's how you conduct yourself. And realizing that no matter what you're doing, you're having an impact on the lives of either the people who are working for you or the people who you are dealing with in the community. And really, that has been central to how I've conducted myself. And one other point there, and I really learned this through running political campaigns, that there's a line between the experience you bring to whatever endeavor you're involved with, but also listening to good advice of the people that you're hiring and trusting to help you out. And sometimes there's a confrontation between that, because, for instance, in terms of a political campaign, for many years, I was the guy on TV who covered the race, either as a reporter or as a manager and anchor and managing editor, and told the public what I thought of a campaign. And now I was a candidate. And people who work in the political world, who help you run campaigns, consultants, campaign managers, they know the politics. And I was at this interesting intersection that, but I also know how it plays in the media. And there's a delicate balance between going with your gut and your experience, but also listening to professionals whose job it is to run campaigns like that. So again, that's a long-winded answer to your question.
let me bring us to a topic that I found really interesting as I was looking at your bio and preparing for this interview. Your experience, particularly around the Black Hawk helicopter story, which won you your Peabody, touched on something that we've been covering in prior interviews. We had Ken Bogart, who's the CEO of a company called No Honesty, KNOW. And he talked about the significance and the importance of truth telling in business, which is something we've been talking about in other interviews as well. And what you uncovered at a very, very large organization was some significant behavior that is hard to justify, explain, or in any way, shape, or form excuse. In fact, what you uncovered was people being bad actors and endangering lives of troops. Almost unthinkable. It's almost beyond evil. I'm not just saying that because I'm a father of a service member. I'm saying it because all of us should find any behavior like that abhorrent. Talk to me about what you experienced over your career in your investigative reporting on that story, which we'd love to hear a little bit more about, as well as other stories about what prompts people in leadership, in business in particular, to go rogue and take their business or their employees down a path where they're endangering lives and or just behaving badly.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples of that. The story that you referred to in terms of the Black Hawk helicopters and Sikorsky aircraft in Connecticut. As an investigative reporter, there are a lot of different ways you get stories. Uh, by talking to people, becoming, forming relationships with people out of mutual respect, and they bring you stories. Sometimes it is people who leave you a telephone message. And with the Sikorsky story, we used to have a tip line. Newspapers have it, TV stations have it, and I had to, go through these calls, sometimes 20, 30 at a time, and you can't spend on too much time on things that you are either not interesting or you would never be able to prove. But in terms of the Sikorsky story, it began with a message left for me saying, defective parts are getting on board Black Hawk helicopters. I have proof. Please call me. And it was somebody who worked on the production line at Sikorsky, and I went over to his house one day, and he gave me the file, and it was in black and white because included in the information was a document written by a captain who was assigned to Sikorsky from the Defense Department to the president of Sikorsky, saying, we are seeing a decline in quality control on these aircraft with specifics. And him saying something to the effect, this leads us to believe that we are accepting aircraft with serious, safety issues. And so right then and there, we knew we had the story. It was still another 3 or 4 months before we put it on television because, we went and we found experts to talk about that. In this case, it was the former head of production of another helicopter, the Apache helicopter, who is now a professor at MIT, who guided us through all the documentation we had and kept us focused on what was significant and maybe what was not significant. And during that entire process, this investigation lasted 3 or 4 years. I did this huge story that made national news, and I was allowed to stay on it for 3 or 4 years. And every time I had a significant update to the story, my management, to its credit, allowed me to do that, even when other people in the newsroom saying, why is he doing the same story again? Or the salespeople who were trying
Alan,
to sell.
let me direct you to the topic that I think is going to be most interesting to our audience, which is, why do leaders behave badly? I'd love to know, what did you learn about that? What takeaways potentially could you share with the audience about here was leadership? I'm assuming it was more than one individual. There are individuals in leadership positions all the way up to the CEO that potentially knowingly endangered lives. What motivations can you share with us, what you concluded or what your thoughts are about how do people get to a point that they behave that badly?
This is the underlying accusation that was present here. The workers who worked in the factory, who assembled the aircraft, said that Sikorsky was laying off quality control inspectors, those people whose job it was to take all the ball bearings and all the subcontracted parts coming into the building and inspecting them before sending them to the production line. It was a cost-saving move. What I found was that this process is not unique to Sikorsky, that no matter what you make, there is, I think the term is smart manufacturing, where you're trusting your subcontractors to sell you and send you 100% quality materials. And what occurred to me is no process is without error. Mistakes are always made. You buy a television that's defective, so how could this be okay? So it was the accusation was Sikorsky was saving money on its manufacturing by instead of having their own quality control inspectors, um, basically subcontracting out the responsibility for quality control to the subcontractors. That was the underlying issue in terms of why this was happening. Sikorsky said that what they were doing did not result in these issues. They did say after we broke this story that they fixed the problem, but we were able to see over the course of 3 years that the quality the issues were continuing until we were able to prove that aircraft were falling out of the sky, and it was so embarrassing that the Defense Department had to put a stop to it. But as happens so often in business, there was a motive that really gets down to dollars and cents, and how our economy is changing, and companies are looking for lean manufacturing.
I want to dig in some more into this, because I don't think at this point yet I've heard what you think was the motivation of individuals. Sikorsky is a company. Companies are not a live entity. Human beings at the company, the CEO on down. I assume that you were reaching out to them for comments, sharing your evidence, asking for them to respond. Did it feel like a cover-up? And how do you explain individuals willing to put their name, their reputation, their honor on the line if, in fact, they believe that they're endangering lives? I think the question that I'm trying to get an answer to is, what leads people to behave badly? And it's simplistic, in my opinion, to just say, well, it's money. Maybe it's money for the organization, but individuals were involved in that and made certain decisions. Did you ever get a feel for what motivations were driving individual actors that you were engaging with as you were investigating, in particular in senior leadership positions?
But what was interesting is, for the first 3 years, Sikorsky would not talk to me on camera about the issue. They gave me written statements. We bent over backwards, to be fair about it. We would show them the documents that we obtained and get comment from them, and we knew we were right in terms of what we were reporting, because they never disputed the facts as we laid out. But this was just. There was so much on the line. The nation was at war. These aircraft were desperately needed, and so there was no, members of Congress gave lip service in terms of our reporting, in terms of cracking down on Sikorsky, but the need for these helicopters were so great. It was only 3 years after, when we were able to show aircraft were crash landing, that Sikorsky went on camera with their head of quality control, and basically it was just the corporate line that, we realize that we have a problem. This is not acceptable, and we're taking all the steps that we have to take to fix the problem. But in terms of the motivation, I don't know if it was one person in particular who said, put defective parts on helicopters. It was more of their belief, and this is an industry, throughout every single industry, that lean manufacturing is the wave of the future. It is how companies remain competitive, and I really did not get any more than that in terms of insight, in terms of how they allowed this to go on for so long.
Yeah, it sounds like they just looked at a cost-cutting measure instead of really taking a longer-term view of it. And then you also have plausible deniability. Well, it's not on us. We didn't make the parts. They sent us defective parts.
What was interesting is, I got most of my information by really brave employees who snuck documents out in their clothing to get them to me. The way reporters or the public generally try to get information like this is through freedom of information requests that could be wrapped up in litigated for many years, but eventually, and this was under the Bush administration, that got so frustrated that 3 years later, they called me and said, we want to give you everything you request in terms of documentation. And it was Sikorsky Aircraft who then sued the Department of Defense to try to stop the release of that information. It was called a reverse FOI. And it was a really unique situation where actually the Pentagon was trying to get me the information, and they were stopped. But this is just big business, and this was the result of it.
I'll tell you, this is as I listen to you, and I think the emerging word that comes to mind for me is apathy. And individuals and organizations, whether they're very large organizations or not, who find themselves, for whatever the reason, being asked to compromise their integrity, it's a career crossroad. And we've had multiple people here, whether it was Lieutenant General Leslie Smith, the former Inspector General of the U.S. Army, and other distinguished people. And the common word, the common thread, has been integrity. And what I'm thinking about is I'm hearing you talk about the folks at Sikorsky and other organizations that behave badly. It's a lack of integrity. At the core, it's a lack of integrity. And if you're someone in a position of leadership, or you're someone who is in a position to share information that potentially could save lives or impact lives, choose integrity first. It sounds simple, it sounds simplistic, but really at the end of the day, if you choose integrity, you're gonna be able to sleep at night.
But Tal, this issue is not, exclusive to Sikorsky or this one story. There were so many examples I could cite. Another one would be involving commercial airlines. That I again got a random communication in the mail from, I believe, an airline pilot showing that in his case, his particular airline was playing games in terms of maintenance, something called deferred maintenance, where and this is a common term throughout industry, is that you defer maintenance depending on how important it is on items, and as long as you can, or as long as you legally can. And the airlines do this in terms of things that break on airplanes. And in this one case, there was a situation in Connecticut where the autopilot wasn't working. And the pilot who's getting on board the aircraft could see that it was broken for like a week. And he got so angry, he stormed off the aircraft and left. And that it then came to me. And what I discovered is that this is a frequent issue, that airlines will defer maintenance on items for as long as legally they can, because maybe if you land in Hartford, it's not a hub, there's no repair station, so you have to wait until that aircraft reaches Atlanta, where there are less expensive maintenance facilities. And so this is something that industry, no matter what it is, always has to balance, is what the most efficient way to get from A to B, and make judgments in terms of what is safe and what is not.
That's I don't know. First of all, that's crazy, and thank you.
Particularly when lives are at stake. I mean, yeah, I think that's the part that's hard for me to wrap my mind around. And it's obviously I'm not naive, Alan. I think you're absolutely right. These oftentimes tend to be decisions that are driven by financial considerations. What always startles me is that there are human beings who are executing these decisions, and at some point, particularly if the business you're in is a business that puts people's lives at risk, you should choose integrity. And maybe it's easy for me to say, but I actually don't think it's easy for me to say. I think I've been in situations and positions in my career where the right thing to do was very, very difficult and very painful. And I'm proud that I've chosen that. And I think the people who are in that position should choose that. And I guess my call out is, if you're somewhere where you are being asked to compromise people's safety, don't. Simple as that.
Yeah.
But and Tal, I've dealt with business people like you who have tried to do the right thing even when it was difficult. But my experience as an investigative journalist has often been people do the right thing when the lights come on. And in the Sikorsky
And
case,
that's why journalism is so important, by the way. It's
Yeah.
one of the big
right,
concerns I've
and
got is, can we continue to have journalists like you out there exposing bad actors? Because you're
right,
absolutely right. Sunlight is the greatest disinfector, as the saying goes.
right. I mean, when I was first investigating Sikorsky, I went to Washington and gave this material to the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and I got a lot of nods. Okay, well, look at it. They never did. They never did, because of how significant this would be and the role of the Black Hawk in terms of the Gulf War, or and everything that happened and since then. It was only after it became undeniable, and I was able to show aircraft going down, that it was impossible to defer the story because of the outrage it would cause.
It's infuriating, actually, right? I mean, uh, unfortunately, we as consumers always take for granted that everyone is acting in everyone else's best interest, especially when government's involved, right? The FAA or whomever. You feel
Food and
like
Drug Administration, right? You assume
exactly,
that, or yeah,
exactly, right? And it's just infuriating that we carry on our lives carefree. Meanwhile, there are bad actors out there. Maybe not intentionally bad actors, right? I don't think anyone's sitting there saying, "I want to put defective parts on this plane so it goes down." Well, some might, but
I would agree with you. No, I mean, I think that's the part that is so difficult. It's that you have to imagine that no one is that evil. Okay.
Right.
And so
Right.
so if it's not about being evil, then it's about being ignorant, right? Oh, I just didn't know. And then when someone like Alan comes and tells you, well, here are the facts, bearing your head in the sand is the part that's very difficult for me to wrap my
Correct.
mind around.
Tal, you mentioned that this is why journalism is so important, but this is what has me so concerned, is that the number of news outlets willing to do this kind of journalism has decreased.
Oh yeah.
Profit margins are smaller than ever because there are so many options for viewers to watch, so you can't charge as much for commercials. If you get the story wrong, you could get sued and for millions of dollars. Companies sometimes don't want to take that kind of risk. And people like me who have worked for years to master this art are sometimes a little bit older and have families and need to earn more money. And at a time when TV stations and newspapers are paying less and less, so are you going to trust somebody who's just out of school to do this kind of work? And obviously the environment that we now live in right now, where TV and newspapers are under attack, makes doing this kind of journalism much more difficult. I have a friend who owns a public affairs firm in Tampa that does crisis communications, and that business has been weak because there's not a whole lot of investigative journalism going on anymore. And so it results in fewer people getting in trouble and needing crisis managers.
It's nuts. And also, like, there's also just the influx of people who just put anything on social media at any time. Yeah. Hey, I want a lot of views on TikTok. I'm going to talk about some weather pattern that I think is concerning, and I'm going to get tens of thousands of views on it. Have people think that there's some big storms coming, but there's no meteorological knowledge behind this. This is just someone who's putting stuff out there. And as we get involved in our echo chambers, and hey, I like to hear, I like what that person's saying versus some other story that I think is more uncomfortable to my truth. Well, then I go down that rabbit hole, and I'm just so frustrated with there's cynicism in this world, but there's a ton of like really just inane dumb cynicism. and where that cynicism is hurting themselves, really. And I don't know.
Well, look, I think I don't want to send our audience into depression.
No, sorry.
But I think I think the reality is this. My inclination is to believe that most people want to do good, and most people want to do the right thing. Sometimes good people find themselves in situations where their livelihood, their family's well-being seems to be at risk if they take certain steps or certain decisions, and that makes it difficult. I believe that generally speaking, people choose to do the right thing more often than not, and that most people are well-intentioned. Maybe that's naive of me, but I choose to live my life that way because I think living it any other way leads you to act more selfishly and less, less in a way that reflects less well on you and your environment, and creates less opportunities for people to come together. And that's ultimately something that I personally make the choice in my life to believe that people are good. And it's difficult to hear stories like the stories that Alan has uncovered. And maybe Alan, having been in journalism for so many years, and you did ultimately choose to pivot out of it, which is an interesting story in and of itself. Yep. Maybe it's harder for you to be an optimist. I don't know. I mean, do you view the world through the lenses of most people are good, as I do, or do you think it's more nuanced than that?
I think it's nuanced because you are right, Tal, and I have dealt with many people, businesses, organizations that are trying to do good in the world, and frankly, and the same thing in politics. I know people on both sides of the political aisle who really do want to serve. And they may have different opinions in terms of political philosophies on the issues, but they go there to try to make their community, their state, their country a better place. Right now, those voices are almost drowned out because when we look at our politics, whether we're talking about what's happening in Washington right now, or in your state capital, or your town or your city, it seems like a circus and a freak show too often. But despite that, there are people who go and are going there for the right reasons. So, that has always been a motivator to me, and it should be a motivator to all those who are watching right now, that there are good people out there, and that's why they need our support.
Yeah. Well, as I look at what you've chosen to do in your career, I mean, obviously being an investigative journalist and taking on, entrenched interests is a risk. You then made a decision to run for office, and you didn't run in a district that would have been easy for you to win. You ran in twice in a very difficult district where there was a path, but it was certainly not an easy path. And you chose to fight the good fight. And after that, you are now helming an effort to reform the Supreme Court, which, again, as I said in the beginning, and I'm not saying that to be negative Nancy, but because I think it's hard to argue that is not a difficult battle to fight. You seem willing to fight those battles, which, either has to mean that at some level you're an optimist and you believe that you can prevail, or just whatever it is that you view as justice can prevail, or you're fatalist and you're just going to fight the fight. Which is it, and why?
I think it's because I'm an optimist, and when you seek to run for office, it is always a gamble, even in the best circumstances. Because even if you're running in a district that is a Democratic district or a Republican district, you still would probably have to go through a primary to be able to make it to the general election. In terms of the 2020 race, the reason why what I thought was the opportunity was that it was a targeted seat from the get-go, because you had a first-term incumbent who was under criminal investigation for campaign finance violations. And so the idea of a well-known investigative reporter going up against a politician who was under criminal investigation, not only gave me reason to think that I could win, but also the party and a lot of other folks believing that we could win. What we didn't realize is that incumbent who was under criminal investigation would be defeated in his own primary, which totally changed the circumstances of the election. In terms of what I'm doing now, in terms of term limit the court, it was born out of the idea that in the environment that we're living in right now, which is so incredibly polarized, that term limits in general is something that has overwhelming public support. Some states like Florida have term limits for their state legislature, for the
Is that bipartisan support? Is support for term limits bipartisan?
Yes, vastly. In terms of if you ask people whether you think that they should be term limits for Congress, it's between 70 and 80% of all Americans. In terms of term limits for the Supreme Court, it's also 65, 70% of all Americans. On our website, termlimitthecourt.com, the first quote you see is from John Roberts, who says, 18-year
Chief
terms.
Justice, a Republican appointed.
Exactly. In terms of our advisory board, we have one member of the advisory board, a former federal judge from Boston, who was on President Biden's White House Commission on Supreme Court Reform. We also have the former Republican Attorney General of Idaho, who was a Supreme Court justice in Idaho. Ted Cruz has voiced his support for term limits on the Supreme Court. Yes, today the politics make it more complicated, but public opinion of the Supreme Court right now is so low that we believe, and we are taking the long road, that this is not something that's going to be accomplished today or tomorrow. But we are building a robust campaign that is designed for 5 or 10 years because this is what the public clearly wants. I was in Washington last week, announcing this effort, corresponding to a new bill that's being filed in Congress. And Congressman Dan Goldman from New York said the Supreme Court should not be in the palm of either party. And this is something that the vast majority of Americans actually agree to. And so when you have such overwhelming public support, it will be our job to help get elected people on both sides of the aisle who agree with that. And the best way to do that is to build a movement, build friends and allies to achieve this goal, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I think you got 2 new people in your in your movement today just from this podcast. I mean, that's, first of all, I totally agree. I think it's such a high concept idea, and it's so true that there needs to be term limits. There shouldn't be, a lifelong commitment of doing one job. It just there's a lot to go into that, but
there is, and the one other point I would make, because people often ask this question, and this is something that is going to be difficult, but it is not impossible, because the White House Commission that has looked at this and other legal scholars say this doesn't necessarily have to be done by a constitutional amendment, which not only needs a vast majority of Congress, but then 2/3 of the state to get enacted into law. It is believed that this could be done by legislation, by offering 18-year terms on the Supreme Court, where justices then obtain senior status, which is the way it is in the rest of the federal judiciary. You get around the requirement of a constitutional amendment. So basically, you need a bill that is passed by Congress and signed into law by the president. And that's what gives us the belief that this is something that can be done.
Wow. So let's talk about you in particular, real quick. You've done this amazing transition. You went from distinguished journalism career to running for Congress to now this awesome nonprofit. I'm sure that has required some soul searching, some deep thinking, some private time where you're collecting your thoughts about all this. There's a lot of people out there, including many in our audience, who have gone through, and myself included, some stark career transitions. Seeing where you are now, what do you tabulate as something that you've done right, something that you think you might have done better, and in terms of like preparing yourself for these steps, and as well as getting your family ready for the challenges involved?
Well, I've been extraordinarily lucky that I have a very supportive family. My wife is a former journalist herself. That's how we met, covering news in Springfield, Massachusetts. And she has always been incredibly supportive of what I do, which is no small thing, because for all the stories that I've been talking about, there is an element of personal risk. And that's something I thought less about before I was married and had children. It is something that you have to take into account when you do have a family. I know for myself personally, I have always been at my best when I am pursuing something that is incredibly interesting to me. Journalism and television, and the process in which I would have to, that it took to produce stories, or to produce a really good show, has always been a challenge and fascinating to me. And I enjoyed doing that for many, many years, until frankly the business model has changed as I have described. That it's very hard for corporations at this point with declining profits to support quality journalism. And I do not believe in mediocrity. I don't want to be mediocre about no matter what I did. And so when I looked around in terms of what I could and wanted to do, I look for what are my skills, and what else can I do that kind of goes into the skills that I have and what I enjoyed most about my career. And as we've talked about, what I enjoyed the most about journalism is seeing the impact that I could have locally and nationally. And I looked at politics and said, this is something also I could have an impact on. I believe my skills in the Congress are sorely needed these days. And in terms of the endeavor that I'm in right now, it's an important issue. And I am not running as a candidate myself, but I'm running for a cause. I want to bring to that endeavor the skills that I have as a writer, as a communicator, and hopefully have an impact on that issue. So, sometimes these decisions are born out of either the opportunity that comes along, and the need to keep moving forward, and that's why I am where I am right now.
I obviously you and I have known each other for some time. I've had the pleasure of being interviewed by you, and getting to know you as an individual, and knowing your family. I've always been impressed with your deep love for your community. And it showed up, I think, as a journalist, and it showed up when you're running for Congress, and it's showing up what you're doing now, because taking on these fights, somebody needs to do it. And it takes a special person to do it. And I just want to commend you on that. We had other guests who've also talked about transition I'm thinking of Xavier Scruggs, who's now the host of Baseball Tonight on ESPN, who talked about
I listen
transitioning
to him all
from
the time.
yeah, transitioning from being a Major League Baseball player to becoming a a broadcaster. And what he recommended to people, and obviously I encourage people to go listen to the podcast. It was a great interview. Was first, of course, find something you're passionate about, then find something you're good at. Ask people, what am I good at? What do you think I'm good at? And obviously you may know the answer yourself. And it sounded like, you have a very clear sense of what you're passionate about, what you're good at. And it always seems to center around doing something, that will benefit the greater community. And if you're motivated, and I'm talking to our audience here, if you're motivated by doing something good, find causes that you're really passionate about and dedicate yourself to them, whether it's your full-time vocation or something you do on the side. And, if nothing else, and I think, Alan, you're the embodiment of that, you're not going to have regrets, because if you're doing something you really believe in and you're passionate about and that you think is important, then whether or not at the end of the day, what you're fighting for becomes law or becomes whatever it is, the fighting the fight is in and of itself a very honorable thing to do. And on that point, you gave us a quote about your philosophy of life, which I thought was interesting, because he chose Rocky Balboa. And the quote was, "It ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, how much you can take and keep moving forward." And obviously we're a podcast about setbacks, overcoming them, perseverance. Right. I'd love for you to tell me where does that spirit of resilience come from, and how do you maintain it? Because I have to imagine, sometimes it's the middle of the night and it's 3 a.m. and you're staring in the ceiling and you're going through career transition, or you're going through whatever you're going through. And I have to imagine there's some doubts. I have to imagine there's some questions you ask yourself. How do you get through those moments? What advice would you give our audience that maybe an audience member that may be going through that kind of point in their own lives or career?
Well, first thing, there's no alternative. I mean, you have to earn a living. You have to provide for your family, and if that's not motivation enough, then you're in trouble. And there's been something. Maybe I can't put my finger on it, but since I was a kid, I've always known what I wanted to do, and getting into television news was really difficult. And back in the day, what you would have to do is you would have to send out your resume and the cover letter and the videotape of yourself to news directors. And it was the most frustrating thing in the world. I would be waiting by the mailbox every day to see what comes out. I would send out resumes to places, from Presque Island, Maine to Nome, Alaska, and get rejected. I would have people, if you remember Charles Osgood from CBS News, he was my mentor. He was the person who taught me everything I knew about writing news. And I remember him calling news directors for me and getting frustrated about the reception that he would get on my behalf. But this is what I wanted to do. And I never gave up. So, there is no quit. I mean, quitting is not an option. You have to, be smart and know what's working and what's not working. But and let me give you another example of it. I said that, my first summer after I graduated high school, I got a job, during the CBS News convention coverage of the presidential election. The next summer, there were no jobs. It was an off-year political year. And so growing up in New York, I went to every network, every TV, every radio station in New York City, and I banged on doors to get a job. I got thrown out of lobbies. And I remember going back to my dad's office one day and said, "I'm going to go back to CBS." And he goes, "No, you're not. You're worn out. You're welcome there. There's no job there. Let's, figure out something else." But, I didn't take that as an answer. And I went back to CBS, and I kind of, I had my old convention ID. I snuck into the building. I snuck into the newsroom, And I started talking to people, and somebody said to me, you know what, we had an opening, but don't have it anymore. Why don't you go upstairs to the 10th floor and fill out an application at HR? And I went upstairs and I'm filling out the application. The phone rings in the background, and a woman comes in and says, "You're Alan Cohn?" And I go, "Yes." And go, "Well, they want you down in the newsroom." Somebody quit at that moment. And I was hired to work overnight, 6 nights a week in the newsroom at CBS News, which was the greatest honor of my life. That's what I mean in terms of, you have to have determination. And Tal, when you requoted Rocky to me, that little snippet is something that I remember vividly, even over the last few months, because I think, as you know, my son is a pitcher for the Oakland A's organization. And he has made it to where he is today because he would not take no. When people said, I mean, your chances of making it to college baseball is very, very rare. Your chances of making it to the pros is very, very rare. Well, he did. And over the course of this season, as many athletes have, you have your ups and your downs. And one night I found that quote from Rocky, and I sent it to him because it really, encapsulizes what you need to do to be successful no matter what you do in life. And that is, we're all going to get punched. And the question isn't how hard you could punch back. It's a matter how hard you could get punched and get up and move forward. And I don't think I really know any other way to be successful in business or in life.
That's amazing. That's awesome. That's it also gives me hope. It's very inspirational, especially with your son, because currently I tout myself as being the 5th string punter for the Chicago Bears. So I'm waiting for my moment to shine. It's been an amazing interview and learning so much about you and so many intriguing things that you covered today. So thank you for all of that. What, as a lasting bit of advice, what piece of advice would you give our listeners who are searching the nonprofit side of things, or to be an entrepreneur in nonprofit arena, or considering the nonprofit world for a career? What piece of advice would you give them?
Well, the one thing that I've been thinking about when I've been thinking before we did this podcast, knowing what the thrust of this podcast is, and if you're out there and you're working in the corporate world and you're seeking to get involved in nonprofit work, although there are things that are different, there are skills that you are quite compatible. For instance, the job of my organization right now is not to make a profit to satisfy investors or stockholders or board of directors. The goal of making a profit in terms of what we're doing right now is to pay staff that people in the corporate world would understand, but also to succeed in terms of a strategic goal. If you're running for office, it is meaning to win office and serve. In terms of what we're doing now, the strategic goal is to bring about term limits for the U.S. Supreme Court. So it is the same but different. You have to use the same kind of business strategies. We have, social media. We are reaching out to people, asking them to contribute to our efforts. It's no different than trying to buy, to get people to buy your product. You have to sell them. You have to use all the techniques that modern business uses to achieve that goals. You're just applying it in a different way. So what I would say to people is, if this is something that is of interest to you in terms of working in the nonprofit world, to go for it. You will find the skills that you've always had are applicable, and you'll have to learn new skills. But that is the truth. The same thing, no matter what you do in life.
Our guest today was Alan Cohn. He's a Peabody and Emmy Award-winning journalist. He's run for political office. He is a businessman who's now the CEO of the nonprofit Term Limit the Court, which I believe people can find online at termlimitthecourt.com. I'm grateful for you being here today. I think that a lot of what you have to share, particularly around bad actors, is interesting. And even though it's I wish there were simple answers, and it wasn't necessarily that I was looking for the one answer. I think the point of the matter is we just don't understand what motivates people. We can make some assumptions. And at the end of the day, my goal with this podcast, and the reason that I agree to host it, is because my objective is to help people see that you can do the right things and make the right choices and act with integrity and lead with love and still be successful. And I genuinely believe that that's the case. That's been my experience, and it's been the experience of a lot of people I respect a lot. And I hope that that resonates with people, even as we all acknowledge that there are people in the world that don't do the right thing, unfortunately. I also would be remiss if I didn't, all kidding aside, say to anyone that's listening, PJ and I are so grateful for you listening to us. We are deeply, deeply humbled to have done as well as we have. We'll continue to work very hard every single day and to bring you guests that hopefully will inform and share interesting stories like Alan here. And I'd also ask you, if you enjoy this podcast, please tell friends about it. Definitely rate us in whichever streaming platform you happen to be listening on. And if you're into it, join our website, www.bravingbusiness.com. We have a very interesting blog that you can subscribe to and receive in your inbox. So, Alan, thank you so much for being our guest today. PJ, thank you as always.
My pleasure.
And we look forward to bringing you more episodes, and whatever you're doing out there, keep braving it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.